Welcome back to the On the Table Gaming podcast. And this week we have a special holiday treat for our Visions in the Flame update. We're going to be looking at the recently previewed changes to the Song of Ice and Fire rulebook, game modes, and looking at the updated preview cards for Song of Ice and Fire, the miniatures game. And I'm joined by Michael Shinall, the lead game designer. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Happy holidays, Chase. And yes, good to speak with you again.
I can't help but notice we are short a Fabio, though.
In keeping with the holiday spirit, Fabio was very naughty this year, received coal and a transfer to the farm. Don't worry, though. You can still send him letters and contact him, but he has no internet, so any direct communication will, of course, have to be filtered to the company.
Fair enough. Okay, I guess it was one pun too many last episode.
I don't know what you're talking about, Chase.
This is actually a pretty amazing update. So we not only get to see some updated previews of new units for each faction, but we also have the rule book. So maybe we could start in with that, because that might give kind of context for everything we're looking at here. The stated goal originally was that you said you wanted to kind of just clean up some things in the rules, add a little bit of clarity, and maybe walk us through some of these major changes that we'll see here.
Well, so as we said in the article, every time we do another version of the rulebook pass, we do, usually a series of minor changes just to clarify wording, clean up some game terms, things like that. So that's the majority of what this is. It's the standard pass that you've seen from 1.1 all the way up to now. Now, we did have some rules modifications that happen here that are similar to the 1.5 changes to that scale. So we can kind of go down those, I guess, individually and hit the major points of them, because there aren't that many, and some of them seem a lot bigger and scarier than they are, and some are actually fairly impactful.
So, starting off with the bat, you have a whole section here on just clarifying some common game terms. Now you have move and target added as keywords, and also you kind of reworked pivot there. What's sort of significant about that for us as players?
Well, so we added moving into the definitions because, while the game was using the standard definition of moving, like anytime something physically moves, that came up a lot as people asking what does and doesn't count as moving. So we added it in here. Target has always been a tricky point for people, and both newer cards that have come out that have used that term more, it was expanded on here. That really plays more into the overall card reworks that we've been doing. As you see, targeting appears much more defined across the tactics cards, unit cards, and things of that. And then I believe we did a touch up to pivot just for some minor wording clarification changing. I don't even remember what we changed on pivot, so it was some minor rework there.
I mean, that's helpful though too, because I think while there's a certain level of clarity, a lot of times what we see is people come into the game from other game systems and they bring other game vernacular to this game, if you know what I mean. And so suddenly, there's multiple interpretations of a wording, because they're basically using different rule sets, and just having it especially clear in the text here. I think that really helps just for going forward for clarity, to get everybody on the same page here and be listen, these are the Song of Ice and Fire rules.
Yeah, and that's the main thing that we're doing through here. I mean, the big list of these changes here are just basically sentence structure, typographical things that are just, okay, we can clarify this just a little bit because you can read it a certain way. I mean, that's the standard stuff that we've done every time we've done a rulebook revision. What I think we can now focus on is we can actually talk about the things that actually changed, which we did mark out as rules modifications in that article that went up. And I believe there are about 5 major things to talk about that changed, that actually have gameplay was affected by these changes. The first one being there is a tactics hand size limit now of 5 cards at any time. So
wow.
So that one is actually not as that one's situationally impactful. And what I mean by that is that usually in most games, that's not going to come up that often, for a player to have more than 5 cards in their hand anytime, unless they've specifically done something to really force that, multiple draws off the tactic zone.
Right.
Night's Watch has the ability to fill their hand up and everything.
That's what I came to thought at first, is Night Watch player, if they went for that kind of particular skew style.
And that's the particular strategy, and I don't say instant because that sounds like a crime scene style thing, but that was the biggest kind of example of that. But this again ties into a lot with the new way we've redesigned around tactics cards and things like that. That basically dragon hoarding them in your hand is not a viable option, but now the game rules actually back that up as well by imposing this 5-card limit. So essentially, if you ever get more than 5 cards in your hand, you're going to have to discard any excess that you get. Now, again, the amount of situations where you will find yourself in the common plays that will lead you to having more than 5 cards in your hand are a little rare, because that means not only did you have to have your full hand of cards, you had to have the tactic zone and then some other outside effect beyond that caused you to draw cards. So now this is just more about kind of juggling and balancing your resources. If you've got an effect that lets you draw additional cards, then you necessarily don't want to take the tactics zone until you empty some of those out. Or you're specifically cycling through some cards in your hand that are going to cause them to be discarded. This is basically going to open up more kind of tactical thinking and plays, rather than let me just dragon hoard as many cards in my hand as I can, and then I've got my entire deck or something obscene like that. Again, the situations where you would have that many cards was kind of limited to a couple scenarios in the game. I'm talking 10 plus cards. But now it's basically just built in here. There is a limit. It seems like it's a big, scary rule that got put in there, but in practicality, it's not one of the most impactful things here in comparison to some of the others. It hits some very specific scenarios, but in general play, it's not something that's going to come up that often, especially with the new changes.
Well, I think what's cool about that is this seems like it might have some ripple effects as far as, certain values in the tactic zone. And now there's maybe more nuance in when you want to take certain things, and you maybe don't want to be going for the tactic zone quite as often, or like every instance you can scrambling for it, because you might already be at your cap there.
That's actually the best way I can probably describe this change, is that on the surface, it's not going to have any specific big splashes, but it is going to cause lots of ripple effects amongst other things. That's a very good way of wording it. So thank you for that, Chase.
Why, thank you, Michael.
Take the compliment.
I'm going to save that clip and I'll just have it on my ringtone now. Be like, oh. Also talking about disorderly charge.
This is another one that's kind of a minor thing. Basically, the old disorderly charge would take place until the end of the unit's action, which then you'd have this little point after the unit activated, but before the turn ended, that would allow for tactics cards to be played. Namely, they were ones that would modify things like surge forth or after the attack has been completed, things that kind of fall in that very specific window. And this is just basically a coverall here that now until the end of the turn, which this does now create some other scenarios where, say you somehow have multiple activations in the same turn. This is more punishing for that, but it's something you need to take into consideration there. This was kind of done to streamline gameplay a bit. This was basically the smoothest way of handling this, whereas in the current form, it was fine, but it did create some wonky interactions. The new version here, till end of turn, does create some other wonky interactions, corner case scenarios, but they're much less frequent than the other ones. So this was kind of like, okay, well, greater of two evils here. Which one do we go with?
And then, people have been asking about, will this be coming? Will there be changes to panic? And we see that panic tests are going from failing a test from D3 plus wounds to just being D3 wounds.
Yeah, there's been lots of speculation over the last few weeks about panic and how it would be modified. And we did hint at it and talk about it in the previous episodes. Fabio specifically, I guess, rest his soul. But this is just kind of ties in.
Fabio is okay. It's not like he's actually.
Oh yeah. Sorry, that's just a term that for when they're up on the farm. That means they're getting a lot of rest, and so they can go and play more. They're perfectly fine. Everything is fine.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
There is no war in Boxing Day. So with panic here, this just kind of ties in with the general reduction of. Not damage. Well, yeah. Well, let's go and say that general damage reduction that you're seeing across the board. Like units lost attack dice, a lot of effects that boost, the amount of just raw damage you can deal at any specific time. Those all got cut back, and panic is just following along with that trend. So instead of being a D3 plus 1, it's now a D3, which also has the added benefit of streamlining it just a little bit, because now there's no hidden plus 1 from her. It's just a straight D3. Now, this is kind of an interesting one here, because something I do want to explain from a just design standpoint is that panic is one of the main sources of damage in the game. It is always meant to be viewed as one of the main sources of damage in the game. A lot of people, when the game launched and everything, they didn't like, and I'm actually going to say they didn't like, because this is a preference, the concept that panic could deal as much damage as an attack. But from a design standpoint, that was kind of the baseline factor, is that combat, usually you would lose more guys from running away than you would killing them to a man. So panic was meant to represent that by dealing, a significant amount of damage. It's not
Look at
meant
all
to be
you
just
historical gamers out there who are nodding sagely along. See? Michael's throwing you guys a bone. Remember to direct all of your concerns about historical accuracy to Michael Shinall at CMON Games.
Well, so it's one of those things, like people will, to this day, will go, well, I only lost one guy from the attack. Why am I losing more guys from the attack than panic? Like, if you saw one guy get brutally murdered, yeah, four guys might run away from seeing that. Like, that's just how that breaks down. But that was always the intent of the system here. Now, with the previous version of the things, when we had, higher attack die values, higher boosts to hit and everything, panic was in line with the amount of damage that was happening there. But as we said, we wanted to scale all the damage kind of back in the game. So the lower in attack dice, lower to hits, lower to bonuses. Panic just naturally got hit by that as well. But what this also allowed us to do is incorporate more effects that modify panic damage in the game.
So like the Lannister Guardsmen that you showed already with the Lannister Supremacy.
Exactly. Those style of effects where if you were meant to deal damage through panic, you deal damage through panic. And
where
it's
the opponent
actually like
could take a -3 to their panic test and then take up to +3 wound.
Correct. That is a significant source of damage and is meant to be a significant source of damage. So, but again, this was the change here that happened. There was a lot of speculation over things, how things would or wouldn't change, but this is, again, it was just scaling back the damage the same way we did the attacks. It was nothing, no major overhaul or anything of that nature.
But you won't be losing like a full rank now on a single roll. You're going to need to take at least some damage, at least a wound, or have some effect that's going to boost the panic test to do those 4 wounds from panic.
Correct. And that is actually an important distinction, is that a panic test on its own cannot remove a rank just by itself. So that means that when you attack, you would have to cause at least 1 wound to, say, trigger a panic test, and then you could roll D3, and that could in turn remove an entire rank. But on its own, a test will never force a rank to be removed. But that's something else you can play around, because now, like, okay, if you're going to crown zap like a full strength unit, you know that the amount of damage you're going to cause it is not going to be able to reduce it down to a rank, which is not going to reduce its capacities in any meaningful way, aside from being just lower in wounds. But now you have much more effects, which we'll get to when we talk about the units that we previewed here and the previous ones. You have much more effects that can modify your panic damage, your panic rolls, and things of that nature.
And then on the summary page, you have some updates to abilities and some of the rules like critical blow and precision. So it seems like these are kind of just getting overworked as a whole.
So the attack abilities we removed from the card and instead moved them to the player aid card and then the rules summary page. And this is for critical blow, precision, sundering, and vicious.
And was that just to kind of free up card space?
That was fully a reason just to free up card space, because each of those effects was taking up 2, on some cards, 3 lines of text, which could be used for either saving space or for actual other abilities. Plus, we already had a keyword system in the form of the condition tokens with vulnerable, panicked, and weakened. So because these are so common across the board, it just felt natural to move them to that same category and area. Now, I did include in here a note here about critical blow and precision, because this is like vicious didn't change, sundering didn't change, and critical blow and precision were the 2 effects that always interacted with each other. Right. And we did make a change here where, based on the new wording, they do not interact. For critical blow will cause an additional hit. Precision causes a wound to be generated instead of a hit, but they no longer have the effects where they both trigger on rolls of 6. Which that was an intentional wording previously, and we knew that interact action existed. But again, with scaling back to the amount of just raw damage and things like that, and that includes things that are cause automatic wounds. That was one thing that got hit with that as well. So essentially now you can stack the 2 if you want, and your rolls of 6 will generate some really nasty results, such as +1 hit and then a save, a hit that doesn't allow a save, but it's not going to generate two hits that do not allow saves.
Okay.
But you actually kind of skipped over what I think is probably one of the most impactful changes here, and that's actually the changes to the terrain keywords and the assigned keywords to the terrain examples. Now, I'm going to kind of hit those in reverse order, because the terrain examples, those are always meant to be used as examples. So people want to customize, their own terrain. They can assign whatever keywords you want. But as we know, in the competitive scene, the tournaments, people just kind of default down to using what's in the book. And again, I mentioned this in the past. There's no issue with that. But we did reevaluate the keywords that are linked to each terrain piece to basically, I guess we'll say, inspire people to use a different combination of what is there. But the bigger thing is that we re-looked at all the terrain keywords, and some of them got changes just for, again, clarification and wording passes, but some actually had their effects changed to give them either some boosts or tone them down a little bit. But basically, we want all the terrain pieces to be viable for different reasons and to actually have impact on the battlefield. And so we really took a look at the terrain keywords and saw, okay, which were the ones that are being overused, which are the ones that are the really dominant keywords that keep coming up, and which ones are pieces that people just don't really bother. So ones like cover, that one got reworked to be a little more functional in how it works. I believe fortified was slightly modified as well. These are ones that, again, we did kind of like some quality of life changes here, and then we reassigned how we had, we rechecked how we'd assigned them out to terrain pieces. So that's going to be another one of those kind of like ripple effect ones that's more impactful that I feel people are going to initially give it credit for. But that's definitely something that I think players should take some time to read and analyze there and see exactly how that changed. Like, I know Dangerous, we kept its damage output that it has, so you can lose like a full rank off of charging through Dangerous. Like, it's a big deal in this situation now, more so than it was previously, because of the way damage works.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that's always been kind of like the unsung heroes of the game, was like the terrain. A lot of people spend so much time thinking about like list building and their tactics card combos, not realizing just how much like terrain and the keywords on them can really shape the battle. So it's really cool to see you guys going back and do another pass over the terrain itself.
Yeah, and again, like when we restructured the way that they're organized through the terrain pieces, so now each one has unique things it does that don't necessarily have so much overlap with some other pieces. Because like low walls, hedges, and stakes all kind of did the same thing, just in slightly different ways, which, okay, I get it, because they are just essentially types of walls. But the way we've reassigned out the terrain pieces now, it's like, okay, a hedge is giving you, rough and cover. So that's super useful for any type of range guys to be behind. A low wall functions differently than a hedge, than stakes, even though they are similar enough.
Absolutely. And this all ties in too with terrain that's going to be used in these game modes that are being updated. And you guys did a pass over a lot of the game modes. And I know maybe in the interest of time, let's do kind of some broad strokes here. But one of the important things is that you have updated the objective cards and the mission cards. Can you maybe speak to some of the changes there?
So as we mentioned previously, we have checked over every element of the game. And that's, from the terrain that we just talked about, from the core rules to all of the game modes. And that includes the objective cards and previously the secret mission cards. So again, we could have an entire just podcast talking about the game modes. And there are 10 present in the book here. We've taken some of the ones from the beta and some of the ones that were released over the previous bit of time that fans liked and everything, and worked them into full, actual modes here and whatnot. But the important thing is there are some broad strokes to talk about and some changes to game modes, but most of these are quality of life changes. So universally, you'll kind of see the deployment zones changed from short, long range to 10 inches. We found after testing a lot of things that really a 6-inch short range deployment zone was very limiting to a lot of scenarios, and it was basically causing it to be, your first round or two are kind of just positioning yourself up into a place where you can then position yourself better. So, and then long range on some just were putting you a little too close to each other. So found 10 inches was a good compromise there for a lot of the game modes to give you just that right amount of space, but also keep you from getting into necessarily just getting into the fight immediately unless you so choose to do so. So that's one of the ones there. Aside from that, a lot of the scenarios are already incorporated into rank play, which is something we talked about we want to expand more on. That's kind of the progenitor to a lot of this, is that you've seen that over the last kind of year and a half, where most of the scenarios key into units' ranks as being important to controlling objectives and meeting those criteria. That was just kind of that was expanded on more so with the other units and unit cards and effects, but you kind of saw that first happening with the game modes.
Right.
But I suppose the big thing to talk about here is, like you mentioned, the objective cards and the mission cards. So the objective cards, they function essentially how they previously did before, where they're just going to grant a special power to each objective. We took a look over those, removed some of the more oppressive and dominating ones, changed some minor ones around, added some different ones here. But we actually ended up in some game modes using some very interesting ways to use the objective cards, almost as like little mini unit buffs on certain units. Like Clash of Kings, the objective cards are actually used to buff your commander's unit in various ways.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
So they kind of became multifunctional, where now we can use them to not only just give powers to objectives, but that's a very broad term, objective. But we can now use them in different game modes to grant different effects. And by numbering them specifically, we allow more versatility there. So this actually is a toolkit for anyone that likes creating their own custom scenarios and objectives as well, to be able to use those in more broad strokes.
So it can be like, attach objective 8 to this unit, and that unit, while they control this, gains precision. Kind of apply like some specific buffs there.
Right, because one of the things is also because they're numbered now and everything, you can play around with some very specific ones like we do in some of the game modes where it says take objective cards, 2 through 4, and now you're going to use those for a specific purpose. In addition to that, we had the mission cards, which have replaced the secret mission deck. One of the changes here we also did is we shrunk those down to the size of mini cards as well. So that's a little more convenient, as they might be like taking up table space on the battlefield there. So that's kind of one of those little like quality of life changes. We reduced the number of them down from being a 20 card deck to a 12 card deck, but in every starter box moving forward, there will be 2 of those decks for one for each player. And this is something we mentioned in the article as well, but I want to just reaffirm here. These cards are included in the faction update decks as well. So when those packs come out, you'll get your 2 copies of your mission deck and then your 1 copy of your objective cards in there as well.
So you said that it'll be included in every starter set going forward. So is there going to be new starter sets, or just they'll be repackaged?
Well, whenever we reprint starters moving forward, then these will include the updated items in there as well.
Gotcha.
And then the Greyjoys include these as well in these. So you're getting those right in there.
So literally everybody get Greyjoys. You'll be good.
Yes. So if you want to take that route, Greyjoys, like we've previously said, will be coming out should be about 2 months, I believe. Q1 before Q2. I don't know the exact release dates in between those quarters, but they will be releasing first. They will have these cards in there. So, if you're playing someone that has Greyjoys, you'll have everything you need. If neither of you has, honest,
if you're listening to this podcast, you are probably going to be playing Greyjoy or know someone who is. So I think you'll be good.
Right, but in the intermediate time, if you don't fill in the category, you can print these off on the website and use these. But the mission cards here, you'll see that they, again, are mainly the same structure as the previous secret mission cards. But again, we have called them mission cards here. We've removed some of the ones that were previously, let's say, imbalanced there, or we've done a rebalancing pass on these. And again, we've incorporated them in new ways as well. So you'll see the revamped Winds of Winter and Dark Wings, Dark Words, but then they also show up in some other game modes as well, allowing them to be used in various ways. Basically, we took the toolkit that we used to make scenarios and these, and we made it a little bit more modular and a little more sandboxy. So if we wanted to try some kind of off the wall stuff, or the players wanted to make some custom scenarios, now there's more in that toolkit to be able to do so.
That's awesome. And I really like the way that you guys are approaching things in sort of this broader approach where you're leaving lots of room for people to make like fan-made, community-made things.
Yeah, well, I mean, so making terrain and making custom scenarios, those are arguably 2 of the biggest like kind of hobby aspect side of things when it comes to war games. People like making custom scenarios, like, I don't know, Christmas themed ones, which we didn't do this year. But
somebody's out there has got to make a Christmas themed battle report or battle scenario.
I'm sure we'll see something coming out. But then, you have that. You have just the changes to terrain here and whatnot. And again, there's no single change in the rulebook that I could go over, or any of these that I would say like, yes, this is the defining change of when we're moving from 1.7 to the 2021 rule set. There's a lot of ripple effect things here. I would say the single biggest one is the change to panic or the tactics cards. But even then, I really don't view those as like, oh my God, this is completely revamped. This is completely earth-shattering to how different this is. This is kind of just a quality of life change. I guess when we talk about the units, we can discuss like big earth-shattering changes versus what is kind of just a quality of life change. But that's kind of how I view this. Like in the rulebook here, even the change to panic, the reduction in damage there, the reduction in overall attack dice, like to hit values, those are more quality of life updates than they are these like sweeping changes. Like to me, the biggest change we've done since the game's launch was the change from panic in 1.5 from the old system to the D3 system. That to me is like, that's an actual big major change. Or like when we're talking about unit identities, when a unit's identity completely changes, like I would actually say that the Bloody Mummer skirmishers, that's a little tricky because I would say that we've changed them to what their role was initially envisioned to be. And it's more so a fact of their initial role just didn't do that. So,
right.
But that is.
So it's like a re-envisioning, but it's more of like a refocusing.
Yeah. So that one's a little tricky to say because like when I talk about like unit like revamps and like changes, if a unit basically kept its same role, then that's just cleaning up, and that's kind of like just refocusing what's doing. That's not like an overhaul. Actually, I will say, Chase, I can give you an example of a overhaul that I know we didn't preview here, but is one. So I guess you'll get on the table exclusive. Here
all right,
is talking about Night's Watch. So
I thought you were going to say something free book, but no, sorry, keep going.
No, I really can't think of anything in Free Folk that unit wise that had that's gonna be a conspiracy node right there. Oh, he said unit wise, so that means it's definitely something with the use attachment.
The fact that you stopped yourself there, yeah, okay. Well, sorry, Night's Watch. Go ahead.
I know how the internet works, Chase. I've spent a little bit of time there. But like Night's Watch. So I will say that like the veterans of the Watch, they're a unit whose identity, I will say, actually probably fundamentally changed. Where in their current role, they were essentially like the tank, like I'm going to go and hold this objective, like unit for the Night's Watch, in the way that they had their 3+ defense. Right. They had counter attack. Yeah, they were a big anvil unit, and their role has. They still do that, but they don't do it in the same way, and they do it in a different enough way where I wouldn't classify them as the same unit that they were, the same play style of unit. Now, of course, I say this having, knowing that we're not actually showcasing them in this document and that we're probably not going to be talking about them for a little bit of time. So, I guess that's just like, oh yeah, these guys changed. Trust me on this one, kids. I will say out of context, yes, that's a unit that I guess in hindsight, when, in 3 months from now, when someone's going back and cramming through the backlog of On the Table Gaming podcasts here, will listen and go like, oh, okay, I see what they meant there. I will say that probably the single section of the game that received the most changes would be NCUs. And that was mainly to an effort to, one, talk about power balancing with them, two, also define their roles a bit better to what they did. Because we had several cases of NCUs were a good offender of this, where it's okay to have one that's generically good. Like Varys does a lot of generically good things, but we also had a lot of NCUs that did a very specific thing very good, but then also generically had some good things they did as well. An NCU should be an important pick. Like you're taking it for a reason. And I actually even think in some of the previews here, which I guess we can get to when we talk about some of the specific ones, you'll see that kind of doubled down on like, why am I taking this NCU? Because I need a very specific tool in my army, and this is what they're bringing to the table.
And I think speaking of NCUs, that you sort of getting a change here in the preview documents you gave us, not only did you include some units and attachments, but you also included some NCUs, so we kind of got a sense of what some of those changes might look like.
Right. So the way we actually set up this document here is that it is entirely based around starter box units, and we showed one attachment, a generic attachment for each faction, one NCU that appeared in the starter box, and then one unit that appeared in the starter box as well. Now, for the armies that have had units previewed already, such as the Lannister Guards or the Stag Knights, those we didn't double down on. So you guys actually got a little bit extra, I guess, for this Christmas compared to everyone else. And then in neutrals, we decided, well, because they don't have a starter box, we just showcased off just some things we thought were cool. So,
well, let's jump into that, because this is some amazing stuff here.
Yeah, I guess we can jump into that section. There's a lot to go over here and a lot to cover, but I feel this is the fun part, right?
2021, these unit changes, starting off with Lannisters. So you gave us the guard captain, Cersei Lannister, which is fascinating, and the Lannister Halberdiers, which were actually one of the units that I know that I saw and was like in love with and really sold me on the game. Talking to people like Duncan Rhodes, it was the same thing where he's like, I saw that unit. Oh my gosh, I had to see more. And they got into the game. So really some iconic stuff here. So why don't we, do you want to start off with maybe the attachments and we'll just work attachment NCU unit?
Sure. I do have to mention, though, that Halberdiers are probably out of the initial release units, probably my favorites. Like once I saw those initial sculpts there and actually saw them on a tray, it was like, yeah, this is going to be good.
Oh my God. So I have a lot of them. I bought a couple in the beginning too. So now, all right, let's get into it. So guard captain. So they now have Iron Resolve. The unit gains +1 to panic test rolls and suffers -1 wounds from failing panic tests. So we already see some like interplay into panic with this unit. Very different than the old Lannister guard captain mechanically in that it would kill somebody to automatically pass a test. What's kind of the thought process behind this?
So something you're going to see when it comes to attachments is that I don't want to say they've necessarily been boosted in power, but they definitely contribute more to units, especially when you start hitting that 2-point level. Like a 2-point attachment is a big investment, and you will see much more gains for your investment when it comes to them. But something we wanted to do here was when you're buying an attachment, you'll still see like orders and everything still throughout there. So, I know that there's not a lot of orders that's previewed in some of these units, but you'll still see orders. Orders are still like strong and they're very powerful. Just with attachments, you really want to get your value out of them. And so the guard captain here is a good example of the fact that he's just giving the unit a persistent kind of buff effect here. And you're getting better rolls to your panic and you're suffering less wounds. So I'm taking him for a very specific reason. No longer, he's no longer married to Lannister guardsmen because they're no longer required to pass their panic test to trigger their ability. But you can see the natural synergies here because they're based on ranks. And this guy is about keeping units alive.
Yeah.
And actually, so like with Lannister Halberdiers as well, they just don't lose their attack profile until that last rank. And so the less damage you take, the less damage that you can, keep from falling to the last rank, the better it's going to be for them. It gives them that element of kind of sustain here, which, we did remove a lot of that from Lannisters. And, well, in some ways, like we mentioned, the Wealth of the Rock was removed as a tactics card, but that was to refocus their tactics deck. You still have elements, throughout the army that's going to give you these little things that are going to help you, survive longer and outlast the opponent, but they just did receive a bigger, stronger push on their focus on their panic front. But so here at the guard captain, you see like, okay, I want my guys to survive, and Lannisters, for example, the Mountains Men, they have. See, I'm talking about units that we're not even showcasing here, so I'm just
Keep going. Yes, excellent.
Super chatty here and everything.
Happy holidays. Let's go. Yeah.
They're a bunch of rampaging and murderous marauders, and they're bullies. They're going to get bonuses based on outranking the opponent, so keeping them alive while reducing the opponent's ranks. They're going to get extra buffs for that. So that's a play style. The guard captain can, assist in that by making sure that they stay above the ranks of the enemy. But again, like just by making this kind of a more like just generically useful effect that's going to trigger more than like once a round from like the order, you can sprinkle him into a unit and that unit just immediately now has more sustain. And so it's a valuable addition to any unit. Like Guardsmen, you can see Lannister Halberdiers, you can see here the Clegane Mountains Men, like I mentioned, they have benefits to this. And so it's no longer just like, oh, this is obviously the best choice for this unit. It's how do I want to kit out this unit and what do I want it to do? So that's the big thing about attachments is making their value more apparent, and then making their abilities kind of not easier to use, but just more impactful over the course of the game.
That's fantastic, though, and I think it was maybe Fabio was talking about last time. It's like you get a 6-point unit and you put an attachment on it. Now it's a 7-point unit. Like, does it feel like a 7-point unit? And it seems like these are really impactful buffs that we're getting that will add to that component.
Mm-hmm. And actually, speaking of 6-point units, I know that we were going to talk about attachments in NCUs. Let's jump down to the Lannister Halberdiers. Speak about them real quick, because this is a good example of kind of what you can expect in a 6-point unit. As we mentioned in the previous podcast we talked about with the combat math and everything, the attack die values are kind of generally being reduced. Like if you're an elite unit, you'll have a 3+ to hit, but if you're just kind of like a standard unit, 5-6 points, some cases 7 points, you just have a lot of special abilities, then you're not necessarily going to have a 3+ to hit. So Halberdiers here have a 4+ to hit. You'll see that their attack die did actually get reduced, which is funny because we had buffed them up in the 1.6 updates, I believe. Might have been 1.5. No, it was 1.5. They got buffed up to an 883 profile.
Right.
Sorry, 884. And now they've been retracted down to a 774. But that's kind of in line with the general things that happen across the board. But they did get a buff in the set for charge order because it now triggers if they're hit from the flanks, not just the front.
Oh, man, nice. So you really got a position to get in behind them or like bog them down, it seems.
Right. And so this is kind of one of those pushes that, like, if a unit does something cool, we want it to do that something cool. Now, there's still counterplay here because you can still get into the rear about them or you can still shut off some of their abilities. But the thing is, like, aside from that effect, they have Sundering on their attack and they have an attack profile that doesn't really degrade. Those are two things that are very important to consider, but this unit is kind of based around that ability, and it needs to be impactful, especially because it's going to trigger once when they get into combat, and then once they're in combat, they're not going to use that ability like perpetually like some other effects do. So it needs to be like something that if you're going to counter it, then you need to really devote resources to it, like by getting their rear or doing something, or just making sure that your unit can actually withstand that initial hit that you're going to take before you actually get into combat, or send some chumps in there to engage them before you send your actual unit. So
you don't know how you'd lead as a force. Be like, go my chumps. All right, now let's take care of them.
Yes, we shall send the men in there until the enemy is fatigued, and then I shall sweep in and slay them all.
Oh man, well that's awesome. So, and then we're starting to see some, like, I think I said that with like the Bloody Mummers as well. Like you see some units are kind of, I don't know if it's fair to say like a duelist unit, but like one-on-one, like this unit might do very well. And so you might want to think about now, like, how do you allocate your resources to deal with this? Or it gives you some interesting counterplay challenges or decisions to make.
Right. And that's the main thing, is like basically creating interesting counterplays between abilities and opponents. We don't want it to just be like, okay, well, I can just do this and completely cancel this out. I mean, you should have those moments where, like, yeah, some things are going to counter some things, but it should be like a risk versus reward or resource management style thing of like, how much am I willing to devote to get past this problem?
Well, then speaking of resource management for Cersei Lannister, she looks, I might say, quite different than she did in the original starter set version. And so her playing the game, she starts with 2 order tokens now. So that's a resource in itself that we're seeing a little bit. And then when Cersei claims a zone, you get to basically remove an order token if you wish to do one of 2 options. So if you claim the crown, you get to search your tactics deck or discard pile for Hear Me Roar and add it to your hand. Or if you control the wealth zone, you can search your tactics deck or discard pile for 1 subjugation of power card and add it to your hand and shuffle your tactics deck.
So one important thing here to note, Chase, is that that's not a choice. That's actually a dual trigger there. If you control crown, you get to search for Hear Me Roar. If you control wealth, you get subjugation of power. If you control both, you're doing both of those effects.
Well, that's way more powerful.
So if you have a setup here where you claim both zones, then you get both of those cool effects. Or if you need just one at a time. Now, I know that a lot of people are going to lament the loss of, old Cersei here, but the reason why is because Lannisters have just, again, we refocus them on the panic damage they have, and they have a lot, and I mean a lot of tools at their disposal through their tactics cards, through attachments, and through units to cause negatives to panic tests. Cersei just kind of lost her place in the new world, I guess, because she basically just doubled down on things that the faction already had plenty of options to do. And so while that was fine, it became evident that, like, well, there are other more interesting effects from NCUs that I can take. I don't necessarily need to take Cersei because I already have plenty of things that are causing negatives to panic. But more than that, it fell into 2 mindsets when it came to Cersei, when it came to like our testers and our player base that we had looking at it, was either they would always auto-include her because they wanted to just completely hammer down the I'm going to cause as many negatives to you as on panic as I can, or they didn't see a need to take her because they had so many other options available that could cause panic negatives. And while that is fine in itself, we figured that, like, well, if that's going to be the case, we can probably do something a little bit more interesting with her. So what she allows you to do now is she allows you to do some card cycling a limited amount of times per game for one of actually two of the most powerful like Lannister cards. I would argue to say that they're pretty much all powerful, but these two especially. Hear Me Roar is largely unchanged from its previous version, so it's the one that causes your panic negative. So her effect is essentially still there. It's just built into her fetching Hear Me Roar instead of just innately doing it herself. And then you have Subjugation of Power, which is their card that allows you to just straight up shut off unit abilities and whatnot. So if that's your playstyle,
Cersei will allow you to.
Yeah, so Cersei will allow you to just cycle that card, so you'll have access to that card more often. But this also brings up counterplay, where if your opponent is really tired of that happening, they can claim wealth or they can claim crown to stop these effects and limit Cersei's, actual impact. So this also opens up some elements of counterplay here, where there's strategic options your opponent can do to block your effects. Like, man, I really don't want them to have a Hear Me Roar. I'm going to take the crown here to prevent her from getting that effect. Or I can foresee this play where they're going to try to subjugation and power me. So let me go ahead and take the wealth here to prevent that from happening.
Oh man. I just feel like it's keeping the theme, but it's adding like this other layer of choice and counterplay. I know I keep saying that over and over again, but I really love the interplay here. And this is just looking at like Lannisters.
Yes, we've hit all one faction out of 7.
Well, let's keep going. Let's plow ahead here. So Starks with our Umber champion here. So long time cool sculpt, wearing the big like bear skin on him. Now has the order in sight. When this unit is performing a melee attack before rolling attack dice, this attack gains vicious and rolls its highest attack die value. Insight
was just changed from an order changed from its previous version as an order to now it's just a straight buff here. And this is kind of tying in what I was saying earlier, where if you're paying the points and investing into an attachment, you're already investing resources into doing that. So the old Insight having a negative built into it, that's been removed now, and now it's just a straight buff. Does he go into every single unit? No, but he contributes to most every unit he's in, especially the Umber Berserkers that we're showcasing.
Yeah, man, and you can see kind of the synergy with the Umbers right off the bat, but you could probably fit him in many units.
Oh yes, and he is one of the only sources of vicious in the entire Stark army, because they don't really deal a lot in panic damage. They actually do have like a generic tactics card that gives them access to that little toolkit, but if you want to really lean into that aspect of it, then the Umber champion is your go-to. And then of course, attacking with your highest value attack die, the Starks function best when they're at the lowest ranks, which usually means that they're also pitching their lowest value attack die. He completely mitigates that, but he ties in well, as you said, with the Umber Berserkers who we're showing here. Now, these guys, I actually classify these guys here as receiving a pretty major kind of change to what they do, because, and it's a little tricky because some people are going to look at this and go like, yeah, they kind of fill the same role, and they do, but they have changed pretty drastically in my mind compared to previously what they were. Whereas before you had this big elite 7-point unit that was hitting on a 3+ that gained a colossal number of attack die, that had Sundering built in, and they were just super fast and nasty. They still are all those things minus the Sundering bit, but they've been moved down to 6 points, and their stats adjusted slightly to make them kind of more of a I don't want to say core infantry, but basically give these Starks a little bit more of a curve over what tools they had available at what point levels.
Just to be clear, though, they dropped their attack dice profile, but if you're looking at this being like, oh my god, they lost so much dice, they're still like kind of above the curve on most of the other units we're seeing here. Like these still are they're a very heavy damage output unit.
They have one of the highest attack die profiles in the game, period. Just they're trading that for being a little squishy on the armor and the morale front. Their morale did take a small hit. Their to hit value gained a small hit in the fact that now they gain +1 to hit for each of their destroyed ranks, so they start worse. And at last rank, though, they're hitting better on 2s of 9 dice, but they don't have Sundering anymore. They're basically meant to like cut through like you would send these guys after a unit that has like average to poor defense.
Yeah, these are your free folk mulchers. How dare you?
Exactly, they're your free folk mulchers. Whereas like conversely, like so one of the changes here that we did this was because they were competing with the same army role as like the Great Axes. Great Axes are meant to be your I'm going to deal with heavy defense and heavy armor style unit, but the Berserkers were arguably doing that same role, just in a not even that different way. So they were really conflicted there. So now the Great Axes have been like more of a focus on, you need something to punch through heavy armor. That's what you got Great Axes for.
Okay,
you need
well,
guys
that's
who are
exciting.
just gonna, right?
Because that was a faction unit that I think always was like working really hard to find its place, and the Great X's have definitely like ebbed and flow in this game's history. But this is a cool chance to find them to have them finally have their niche that works for them.
Right, and now they're not competing with the Berserkers. The Berserkers are they're just going to throw a ton of dice at you, and they're going to do it very
like a berserker.
I don't want to say precision-y because we have the effect that says precision. Yeah, 9 dice at a 2+ is a scary, scary profile.
Yeah.
And the fact that when they're reduced down to that rank, they're essentially suffering almost no damage from panic because of their unyielding rule.
Yeah, it's true. Okay. So on their last rank, they're still terrifying.
And then you factor in, like, I'm going to throw a number champion into these guys for 7 points. And now at any point in their lifespan, they're throwing 9 dice with vicious because of the Umber Champion's Insight order.
And Sansa looks like she's been studying her game. And so she's seeing a little bit of a change here as well, having those orders show up on her. And now, is this a thing we're going to see on a lot of NCUs, is order tokens being applied?
So a lot of NCUs that had once per game effects, you'll see that now some of them still have those once per game effects, but a lot of them were kind of rebalanced around giving them slightly toned down effects, but being allowed to use them multiple times per game via the order tokens, or some of those reworks there. Like I said, out of most of the things that change, NCUs probably received the most. And this is kind of an example here where Sansa was reworked here a bit but essentially now, like, you take Sansa when you want to do some tactics card recursion here, which is a very strong effect because you're getting back resources that you previously used before. But before, she would be able to search your deck or discard pile once per game. Now she can only pull back from the discard pile. And yes, it is a zone replacement effect twice per game. But again, that's any zone. So now she actually becomes a little bit of a counterplay unit for Starks, where let's go back to previously, like I spoke about Lannisters. Say you wanted to block off them taking crown or the wealth zone and whatnot, but you really don't want those effects. Like, Starks don't care about the crown. They really don't. But now Sansa, you're at least not going to feel like, you're having to take an effect that you don't want just to block it. You can take Sansa here and go like, okay, I'm going to take the crown, block you from getting this effect, but I'm going to get my own cool effect here as well. So there's a contingency that you built in. And frankly, that entire interaction that I just explained to you also sounds so fitting to the setting here, where it's like, oh, Cersei was going to do this crown play, and Sansa was like, oh, wait, no, I've seen previously how people do this, so I'm just going to wander over here and do that instead.
Absolutely. And Sansa Stark's Little Bird has been a popular character for a long time, and I still think she's got that edge here.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot to recoup from after having a direwolf that's completely dead in all ways, shape, and forms. R.I.P. Lady #.
Oh, you went there. This is supposed to be a holiday episode, Michael. We gotta lift people's spirits. What are you doing?
I think wolf pelts are very festive.
Oh my gosh. Someday, I'm just saying, there's got to be like a giveaway, like limited edition Sansa sculpt with a lady or something.
Oh, I was going to say we could get one of those IKEA rugs that they used to make the Night's Watch cloaks and send those off to someone as a wolf pelt. But
oh my God, this is getting too sad. Let's segue to Night's Watch then. So Night's Watch then. We got our watch captain, Jorah Mormont, and the Sworn brothers.
So it's a little tricky to talk about Night's Watch without also talking about the vow mechanics that we talked about in like the previous article about tactics cards, because they're such an integral part into how the watch functions. So I guess the thing to preface this with is like the way vows work is that you can now stack them onto a unit, so you can have multiple vows on a unit. As the game goes on, these units are just going to get scarier and deadlier as they start doing stuff across the battlefield and accumulating more vows. So this is really playing into the elite nature of the Night's Watch army. They have a lot of expensive units, but those units are they start scary and they just get scarier as the battle goes on.
And the watch captain is terrifying here. So this is a 3-point attachment now with Relentless. Starter a friendly turn, this unit performs 1 attack or maneuver action. Do not activate a unit this turn.
Or gaining an additional attack or maneuver action throughout the course of the round. So effectively, a unit's getting two actions on the round because it gains normal activation, and then it's able to do a bonus attack or maneuver action throughout the course of the round as well.
Oh my gosh. And boldness and courage, each time this unit attacks, if it has full ranks, it gains +1 attack die. Otherwise, it's treated as having +1 rank for attack die. So seeing that, hefty 3 points for really strong ability.
Yes, and so something else I want to point out is that Night's Watch attachments, the Watch Captain is by far the most expensive one they have, clocking in at 3 points. But that is because he is giving you Relentless, which is essentially doing two things. It's giving you a bonus action for the unit that he's on, but it's also giving you essentially another activation because you're able to, use this to get a maneuver or an attack in lieu of activating another unit. So, like for example, CMON Sworn Brothers, you have a 10-point unit, but it's not just a 10-point unit that's really scary and nasty. It's a 10-point unit that's 2 activations throughout the round. So, you're going to have, technically you can have less units on the table than your opponent here, but you'll have the same number, if not more activations if you're sprinkling Watch Captains throughout them. But
man,
I will say
fantastic.
Right.
That's crazy. Wow.
But I do want to stress that, like, comparison to most armies, Night's Watch attachments are going to be the best value for what you're going to see. And this is also where the cross-faction comparisons really break down. That, again, we strongly have always said this, you can't compare effects across faction, because I know there are several examples of 1-point cost Night's Watch attachments that have just some abilities that are sprinkled across other factions, and then more abilities on top of that as well. So you're going to look at the two and go, like, why is this one only 1 point? And this one is the same point, but has another effect on top of that. It's because they're in Night's Watch. The way they function, what they contribute to that army and the way it functions is different. Because say you had like an attachment that's in another army that had access to 4, 5, 6 point units or whatnot, that spread that has to be accounted for of all their attachments. Night's Watch, they have very elite units, and then they've got very specific in conscripts, some very cheap units.
And then, of course, we've got Jeor Mormont, the Old Bear, with Duty to the Realms of Men. Each time Jeor claims a zone, choose one, target 2 friendly Night's Watch combat units, move 1 friendly attached tactics card from one of those units to the other, which is awesome. Or you could elect to choose, replace that zone's effect with search your tactics card or discard pile for 1 tactics card that can be attached to a unit and attach it to a friendly Night's Watch unit. Shuffle your tactics deck. So you can just like pull it right out and put it on the board.
Right. And so that second effect is not going to be used nearly as much as that first one. I mean, that's we knew that, and that's the design there. Because usually you're going to want to play the tactic card from your hand to get the effect and then attach it to a unit. But say you need that really like clutch play to and I really need this buff, or more importantly, I need to take a zone from my opponent, but I don't necessarily want the zone effect. Again, showing off that kind of counterplay thing. You have an option with Jorah to do that. Now, Jorah here had to be reworked almost entirely because of the way the vow mechanics changed. Because the old vows were limited to 1 per unit and were usually tactic zone reliant. Well, that means the Watch Captain, his old effect didn't work because he removed the limits from both of those. Well, if those don't exist anymore, then he wasn't doing anything. So he had to get reworked. Jorah kind of fell under the same category there, where he was playing off the old vow system that got overhauled, and he had to be reworked now as well. So these are examples of units that attachments and NCUs that got completely overhauled because of not so much like gameplay balances or whatnot, but because the way the mechanics that they played with changed.
And then the actual Sworn Brothers themselves, the kind of the backbone of the Night's Watch. We see them with their order martial training and their greatsword, as usual, having its sundering. Now just a nice little keyword, leaving lots of room for space on the card.
Well, they also lost Critical Blow off of the greatsword. And that is, Critical Blow still exists in like a lot of units and a lot of places, tactics cards and things, but it has been cut back a little bit on baseline units because it is one of those kind of explosive abilities that like it kind of creates a die roll and luck dependent thing, which is fine. Like, again, I've got nothing against Critical Blow. I remember seeing some people that were thinking that it would be removed entirely because it created math curves that exist outside the normal spectrum, which is true. But no, that it's obviously still here. But we did remove it from the Sworn Brothers here as basically part of their, again, the overhaul and like just looking at how much damage potential they had. But they traded that for martial training, which allows them to just straight up reroll attack dice and make the opponent vulnerable. So these guys can attack you with sundering and cause you to be vulnerable. They're going to just slice through any armor they come across, just like a hot longsword through butter here. And that gives them a very clear, defined role in the Night's Watch. And that's essentially how a lot of their units are going to function, is that they have a very clear role. This is what they do. And they do it very well, arguably better than a lot of other units in the game. So you want, your sword in the darkness that's going to pierce through the enemy armor and just deal consistent high damage. That's what you have your Sworn Brothers for. You want your guys who are going to be your objective holders. And we kind of briefly talked about this earlier, but not so much of a tank unit, but more just a disruption and hold objectives unit. You've got your veterans of the watch for that. You want your harassers and your skirmishers that are, meant to go and disrupt enemy plans and just create a giant pain in the ass situation. You have your hunters for that.
So it sounds like this is also a cool opportunity to expand upon the Night's Watch themes that were already pretty developed, but kind of reinforcing the roles within the different subgroupings.
Right. And that's before you factor in the vows, which are going to continuously start buffing your units as the game goes on. So like a Sworn Brothers unit that survives until, round 5 or 6, that's got, like 4 or 5. I mean, let's say that they had like 4 or 5 vows on them. That's going to be a scary, hard to kill unit. So the whole thing about Night's Watch is that they play the longer game, and an opponent that's playing against them, you need to really hammer down and focus on units. And you can't spread your wounds across the battlefield. You cannot. There's very few units that are going to be able to stand toe-to-toe with a Night's Watch unit that's been fully decked out. You're going to have to devote resources to taking them out, but that's the trade-off for them, potentially having a lower number of unit count or lower number of activations. Because like going back to like the Sworn Brothers example here, you could deck these guys out with a Watch Captain and have a scary 10-point unit that's activating twice around. That's going to be a scary 10-point unit that's activating twice around. But once it's taken off the battlefield, it's going to be a major blow to the Night's Watch player, but it shouldn't be an easy thing to accomplish.
And then moving into Free Folk, maybe starting with the unit here. Wow. Free Folk Raiders have gone from 3 points up to 4 points, but they've gained a lot of other elements that kind of mix in. So they still have Insignificant. Their attack profile actually went up on their last rank. They lost Gang Up. And they now have this thing called Cowardly. This unit suffers +2 wounds from failing panic tests. So their interplay with panic is much more severe now, because these are kind of your chaff units, right? And then most interestingly is they have this keyword now, Adaptive, which you reduce the cost of 1 attachment in this unit by 1. So kind of what's going on here? What was the idea or behind the vision for Free Folk Raiders?
I mean, I don't really think any of your viewer base really is that big of a Free Folk fan here, Chase. So I think
that's okay. I'll make up for it.
Are you sure? I think we can really just skip over these guys.
No,
we can probably just move on.
This is crazy talk. We have, good grief. Okay, so Adaptive. Now, I'm just still stuck. There was it coordinated plans, coordinated tactics, coordination tactics. There was the tactics card you could move attachment abilities with it.
You can move unit abilities around. So until the end of the turn, units basically would share abilities. And of course, that applies to attachments as well, as all attachment abilities originate from the unit.
Right.
So here, like Gang Up. Well, first off, you have Free Folk Raiders.
I got too excited. I jumped in. Let's do it slowly. Here we go.
Oh, no. I was very content to just let you Chase, just break it down for us here, because I could tell even when we were talking about Watch, you're just like, yeah, whatever. Come on, move on.
Next slide.
But so Raiders here, like Free Folk are your horde army. They every one of their units, is not the best individually, but the sum is greater than the individual pieces. So here you have Free Folk Raiders who have lost their restriction of having to be fielded in pairs. So people that buy Free Folk Raider boxes now won't have feels bads of I need 2 of these boxes. You can run just a single unit. But these guys here are one of the cheapest units in the game when you factor in Adaptive. They're essentially a 3-point unit that gives you a free attachment, which is a big deal because, as we talked about, attachments really do contribute a lot to the overall units. A raid leader here is one example. If he's got Gang Up, where this is an effect that's not only benefiting the unit that is engaged with it, the unit that he's attached to, but every friendly unit that is also engaged the same target, because it allows everyone to get +1 to hit and +1 attack die if you're engaging with multiple units.
This is huge. That's elite status now, 3+ to hit.
Well, getting the +1 to hit and +1 attack die are 2 of the rarest effects that you're going to see in the game. And then you have the raid leader here who is just throwing it across, throwing it on every unit he wants, willy-nilly, whatever here, and turning your Free Folk Raider unit into a 3+ attack die, a 3+ to hit profile of 7 attack dice at max ranks, assuming you're ganging up here. And that's crazy for even a 5-point unit, much less a 4-point unit that's sitting there. But the trade-off is that these guys explode the second someone looks at them the wrong way, because they have that 5+ defense, which, is actually not terrible. I mean, it's not a 6+, right? But then you've got the morale value of 8+ and Cowardly. So, this is showing flipping on the Lannister side of things. This is just showing the the opposite end of that spectrum, where you can have effects that deal additional panic damage, but you can also have some effects here that are negative to you. So like crown zapping these guys. Let's go back to Starks. Starks don't really care about the crown zone, but these guys suffer +2 wounds from failing panic tests. So all of a sudden, crown zapping these guys becomes a lot more attractive. It's like they're only passing, they have a 9+ morale and are suffering, D3 +2 wounds from failing. That's all of a sudden pretty enticing to do.
I just love the fantasy of it too, though. Like the idea that like free folk raiders on their own, they're nothing special. It all depends on like who's leading the raid, like who's the raid leader party, who's the raid leader of that group, and so then that group has its own flavor. So you really do have like that horde, like call the banners, and like each group shows up, but they've got like a kind of a different feel, and like, well, that group's being led by so and so Two Tusks from wherever, and this guy's got and it's like, oh wow. Like
this is the Walrus Clan Raiders here. So, and the thing is, the attachments are defining this unit and giving it its specialization here. So, like, you stick a Walrus Clan Chieftain in here, all of a sudden these guys are big and bulky and have just an obscene ability to absorb hits. You stick a Champion of Bone in there, and all of a sudden these guys are actually really scary when it comes to, like, panicking the opponent and whatnot. You stick a Raid Leader, and these guys become like kind of generic support here, but that's fine because you just have a raid leader guy there. And this is not even talking about like the characters.
Ain't nobody gonna be complaining about having a raid leader in their army. Like, this guy's helping us all out. Like, yeah, you're cool,
right? And so that unit is going to be defined by the attachment you take. And as you see with just even the one free folk card that we have previewed, that actually has much bigger ripple effects in the entire army, because all of a sudden now having that attachment giving an ability here is something that you can now spread across the rest of your guys and group up and give them the benefit as well.
But at the same time, they're like one of those like children's like 80s villains where it's like they have like that one weakness and you're like, it does this cool thing, but like if you just punch it hard, it stops.
I'll get you next time, Rob. Next time.
So then we got Lady Val, the Wildling Princess. When Lady Val claims a zone, you may replace that zone's effect with one friendly combat unit performs one maneuver or retreat action. If they retreat, one enemy they disengage from becomes vulnerable.
Right. So Val here is an example like where she remained largely the same, but got a small buff and a points increase. For the astute readers out here, you might be noticing a trend here in some situations, but I'm not going to get into that. But so Val here, you see there's actually a little bit of stealth clarification here. Whereas her previous effect was she would replace the effect with the effect of the maneuver zone. Now, instead of having to cross-reference that, her replacement effect is just very blatantly like printed on here. But that also removes the question that would come up of like, oh, well, does that have anything to do with me controlling the zone? Or if I'm replacing the effect of the maneuver zone with something else, can Val trigger that? All that kind of ambiguity of those corner case scenarios from readings is just gone, because she very clearly is just replacing that effect with one that is completely unique to her. It just happens to 90% of it be shared with the effect of an existing zone. But then again, she also has the added benefit of when they do disengage, she does throw down that vulnerable token. So there's a little bit more play here to just her old effect when she moved from 3 to 4 points.
It lets you set up some cool combos. I like it.
And so on her, you see that, as we said, we're taking her for a very specific reason. If you want the extra mobility added to your army, say you're employing some hit and run tactics with some spear wives and a spear wife matriarch and that style of army with like Harma, then Val is going to be your natural fit. Or even if you have like kind of a tankier army, like running a bunch of thins and you want to start like taunting people across the battlefield, Val is giving you another piece to that like that toolbox of yours. Versus some other armies, like if you're just going to like spam raiders, there's probably not a lot of reason to include her in your list. So again, it's just giving some army roles and functionality to things to like, this is why you take this unit, because they're giving you a specific tool and not necessarily just because they're generically good or powerful.
And then looking at the Baratheons, oh my gosh. So we saw already the Stag Knight's rework. Looking at the Stag Knight Noble, we got a 2-point attachment. So he's losing that Reckless Vengeance order they used to have, where they like suffered wounds to make an attack. And now they have Iron Resolve, which reduces the amount of damage they take from failing panic tests and boost the morale. And Go Down Fighting, where each time rank in this unit is destroyed, an enemy they are engaged with suffers a wound. And Stubborn Tenacity, each time this unit passes a panic test, one enemy they are engaged with suffers a wound. Whew. This is a 2-point attachment, but we're kind of seeing that sort of spread of abilities now on the more expensive attachments. Like that's quite a lot. these guys are pretty tanky when you put them, especially in like a Stag Knight unit.
So there's two things to factor in with the Stag Knight Noble. Is one, as you said, he's an expensive 2-point attachment. But he is giving you just a ton of abilities here that are playing off of your panic tests. But more importantly, these effects are all causing wounds. And usually across the board, the amount of just things that deal straight wounds has been cut down. So here you're paying a premium for not only that, but multiple instances of that and abilities to trigger that with Iron Resolve. Now, the old effect that he had of Reckless Vengeance, that fit in perfectly with the Baratheon playstyle of, okay, you're going to hit me, I'm going to hit you back. But it kind of fell into the other thing we talked about, which was free actions and limiting those a little bit in the game. Of course, free actions still exist, across like tactics cards and some abilities. But in general, you are tending to have, they're coming at a bit more of a premium. So with the Stag Knight Noble, actually his old design fit very well in line with the current changes to the game and everything, but it wasn't really quite hitting out at 2 points. 1 point, it was showcasing to be a little too good, so we just decided to take him back to the drawing board and redesign him, into his current form here to really fit that whole Baratheon mentality of, oh, you're going to do something nasty to me, well, I'm going to make you pay for it. So that's the embodiment that we have here. And yeah, like you said, you can stick him into a unit of Stag Knights. They become a 10-point unit that gets stronger as the game goes on, is much more resilient, and now even if you get past that resiliency, they're going to punish you for that as well.
And yet it's also a 10-point unit.
Yes, it is. It's an investment.
You're definitely paying for it, but man, that is some scary stuff. Baratheon Sentinels. So we can see them a little bit more, I think maybe say more mobile. That Order Sentinel they have. After a friendly unit in long range is attacked, the unit performs one charge or maneuver action. If charging, it must target the attacker, and they still have their double hammers with Sundering. Despite having a decreased attack profile, like that seems like they're going to be able to zip around the board. These are pretty fast for Baratheon.
So, and that is an excellent point, that for Baratheons, this is a very mobile unit in an army that is not very mobile on its baseline stuff. But here with the Sentinels is another example of a 6-point unit, and you see those stats kind of reflected here. If you're 4+ to hit, they've got a good attack die profile that doesn't really degrade that much. Their defensive stats are on the good side across the board right here, but they have the extra mobility from Sentinel. The issue that Baratheon, this unit had previously, was they just didn't really have any kind of flair about them. They were a fine workhorse unit. They did get a bump to their morale here to give them a little bit more sustain. But previously, they did lose the 3+ to hit. But so again, that's in line with the overarching changes here. But if we had not given them Sentinel, they would have been a perfectly salvageable unit here, but they really just wouldn't have been anything like, okay, why am I taking these guys? They've got Sundering, but I can find it elsewhere. They've got a decent movement, armor, morale, attack die profile. It's all fine, but they didn't, why am I taking these guys? That question still was not being answered. And that's why they gained Sentinel. I will also admit that, the fact that these are Baratheon Sentinels and they didn't have the Order Sentinel, okay, that's that might have played a part in it as well. It just happened to really fit their role in the army of okay, we're reactionary, you're going to hurt our guys, we're going to come after. And so this gives them a clear defined role in the army. They're an offensive unit, but they also serve the role of kind of that guardianship of, you're going to get locked in combat for other units if we play things correctly, and if you attack them or you damage them, the Sentinels are going to come and punish you for it.
Cool to have that sort of diversity now in your list building as far as compensating for the lack of movement with a unit like this. So they've got some options here.
And this is also another unit that at 6 points, they're not so much of an investment that, it's man, they're the mid-range unit. So I can look at some attachments and stick in there to really modify what their role does.
Right.
The Stag Knight Noble that we're showcasing here is probably not the best example here, because you could stick him in there and it would make them an 8-point unit. It's a nice set of abilities, but it wouldn't be my first pick to put in there. And we're not going to get into which attachments can and can't go in there, but they're versatile enough because their stats are fairly vanilla across the board that you can kind of kit them out to their role, and then they've got the extra little bit of mobility to get and set up the plays they need to with that Order Sentinel.
And then Shyra Errol, the infamous, or famous, I guess I should say, Lady of Haystack Hall, who is now famous. When she claims the crown, restore 1 wound to 1 friendly combat unit. When she claims the tactics zone on the tactics board, remove a condition token from 1 friendly combat unit. And when she claims the wealth zone, if you remove a token, place 1 token of that type on 1 enemy combat unit. So a little bit more versatility there as well in her options.
Right. So she went from 3 to 4 points here. She gained the effect, though, where she claims the crown, she can restore a wound to a friendly unit. And the crown effect being central to Baratheons is that's one of their main zones that they want to take. So for her, you're rewarded for taking that zone. So when you look at her like wealth claim ability, it used to be placing any token. It's been slightly limited now. So you're removing a token of that type and you are placing that same type of token, where that is just technically a nerf to how that ability works, but you're paying for the versatility in here. The fact that she has bonus effects that just trigger off of 3 separate zones, 2 of those 3 zones being core to Baratheons, with the third one potentially being important as well, depending on your commander option here. So here, you're paying a little bit more for her versatility, but you're getting some like consistent effects that are, taking place here. And, yes, she is very infamous. And I will just say that like when Winds of Winter finally releases, all the Shyra Errol fans are going to be like, oh my God, I didn't even know that turns out that she is the Night's Queen. I mean, I guess that's spoilers for,
spoiler,
the next
spoiler. Good gosh. All right.
Sorry, spoilers. Shyra Errol, #Night's Queen. But
Fair enough. If, Jim Ludwig, I wonder if he signed off on that. We'll have to see if that's official. Now we got House Targaryen, and we've got the Screamer Co. 1 point, and it may be only attached to Targaryen units. So we're keeping those Dothraki with their squads there. It's got the Order Martial Training. When this unit performs a melee attack before rolling attack dice, this attack may re-roll any attack dice, and the defender becomes vulnerable.
Right. So this is the previous effect that we saw on the Sworn Brothers. And it is the same effect that you'll see on the Sworn Sword Captain for the Starks. But the very important distinction here, this is going on cavalry, and that means Dothraki. So unfortunately with the Targs here, you're kind of having a little bit of a hodgepodge over what you're seeing here. But so like the Screamer Co., you take him and you stick him in a unit of Screamers or Veterans, and it's giving you some more sustained options for when you get into combat. Because like the Dothraki, especially the Screamers, they are based around that kind of alpha strike. They're going to hit you really hard in that first hit. But once they get locked into combat, that's where they kind of suffer a little bit. And you stick a Co in that unit, all of a sudden that no longer becomes a thing because now they're in combat. They've got a very impressive attack profile for their point cost. And now you have the ability here to just straight up reroll your attacks and make the defender vulnerable. So it's almost like every single, like you're going to get your initial charge in there. It's going to be very impactful. And then after that, if you get locked into combat, if you have a Co in there, you're just as deadly then as you were on that charge. So you actually gain a huge amount of sustain with your Dothraki cavalry just by including this guy.
You wouldn't want to face them, Michael, on an open field.
On an open field chase. That has to be one of my favorite, just like, of anything in the series. It's just that little exchange.
We'll work our way up to the big Targaryen piece here. So let's jump over to Mopatis. We'll save the best for last here. So Ilrio, he now has Ilrio's Boon, where each time Ilrio claims a zone, you may replace that zone's effect with target one friendly combat unit. They restore 3 wounds. One enemy they are engaged with becomes weakened. So it's no longer that once a game effect.
Right. So Ilio here is an example of was the free action bit. Now, granted, you had to pay resources, and there were some stipulations across getting that free extra activation. But especially in the new, just basically formatting of things, I can only find so many synonyms to talk about, like the changes that we've made. That ability was not really fitting well here. Removing activations and giving extra full activations to things is probably one of the rarest things that you will see in the game. And so it just really wasn't fitting here. So this is another one here that we redesigned from scratch from the ground up. And with the Targaryens specifically, each of their units, they don't have a lot of synergy amongst themselves. With very rare exception, they're just individually powerful units that are brought together really by the commander. As we talked about in the previous tactics article, each of their commanders has 4 tactics cards as opposed to the normal 3 to really push that army theme home. Like, again, running Khal Drogo, you're going to have this Mongol, Dothraki horde just charging across the battlefield. That's going to play very different from one that is an army that's led by Barristan Selmy, who has a lot more knightly kind of defensive tactics here. And so your unit variety and choices are going to be vastly impacted by that. Now, that's true of like any commander for most armies, but it's it's doubled down with the Targaryens because of how their units function as well. Lannisters, they'll have synergy between attachments and units. Same thing with most of your other armies. But like here with the Targaryens, the Dothraki play very distinct from the Unsullied, that play very distinct from dragons and such. They don't really complement each other. They just are individually powerful. And so Ilio and a lot of the other Targaryen NCUs kind of function off of that, where they do have some minor synergies, but usually they're just kind of doing their own really cool thing. So like Ilio here, he can just straight up give you the replacement effect of healing wounds and then making guys weaken. So you could take this with Unsullied that are going to grind into combat. This is going to give you the ability to heal guys up and then make the counterattack weaker because they're weakened. But frankly, he really synergizes well with like Dothraki, who if they get into a prolonged combat, that's where they don't want to be because they don't have the best defense out there. So by making the opponent weakened, you're helping out a lot to just keep their survivability up. So I mean, you stick a Dothraki Screamer unit in there with a Ko, and then they're backed up by Illyrio here, all of a sudden that unit becomes a lot more, can start sustaining a lot more combats. And that matters who you're up against, because like the Alpha Strike is nice, but say you're up against a full like tank army of just like Baratheon Wardens and something like that, the combat's gonna get prolonged regardless if you want it to or not, because of just the nature of the opposing army you're against. And here, Ilio will help you stay in that fight, whereas usually you would kind of be in a disadvantage there.
And it's a flat 3, so you can kind of predict how much healing you're doing. It's not going to be a randomized effect. So that's really nice.
And also, final thing to note with him is that I know I keep going on and on about this, but you have counterplay with him as he's allowing you to take zones and replace the effect. So if you are playing, a Baratheon that list that really heavily wants the crown for one reason or another, then Ilio allows you to take that, and if you don't want to use that panic effect, you can start healing guys up. If you want to take the tactics zone, but you don't need additional tactics cards to throw out, he's allowing you to take that zone to get that effect. So again, he's giving you the extra little bit of versatility by being a zone replacement. And then also he's giving you that denial of the enemy as well.
All right. And now the moment you've all been waiting for. We've got Jorah, who's a low rider. He's got he's guaranteed to run faster with increased movement, hit harder with an increase to hit. He's got an extra wound. This is the improved Jorah Mormont, the Wandering Knight. He's looking good, sir. He's looking good.
I mean, he's still going to get straight killed by, most any unit he comes in contact with, but he's 3 points. So, I don't really know what we're expecting there, because 12 guys versus a guy on a horse. I mean, they're going to kill that guy. He's going to die.
And I love the way the scouting opening now. So it's targeting one enemy in long range until the end of the turn. Friendly units attacks on that enemy gain precision and may reroll any attack dice. That's amazing, though. He's super helpful in kind of skirting around the outsides of your force and setting up targets for you to smash.
Well, and that's exactly where he should be. This is Jorah, a guy on a horse. He does not want to, he's not going to charge into combat by himself and just start cutting down a swath of guys.
Is it too late to change solo rider to Jorah Mormont, a guy on a horse?
I mean, Chase, just for you, we'll make the special version of a guy on a horse.
I mean, come on. Sorry, go ahead.
I will note as well, by the way, that is not a Jorah specific rule. That is just a kind of a generic rule here, like cavalry. So,
okay,
that's something to note. So you might see that a little more often. But there's a difference there between it just being the cavalry rule, because as you see, this allows you to do a retreat action. So if you manage to get into combat or charge for whatever reason and survive, you can actually get yourself back out of that combat. So, but again, Jorah here is not meant to see combat himself. He's just has some minor capabilities where if he does. But yeah, he's there all for that support piece of that scout openings, which you can already see just throwing that onto some Dothraki, now we have precision and now we can reroll any of our attack dice. So, you can take him to do that. You can take him to throw there into some Unsullied there, or, even some Stormcrow guys, who, neutrals, they don't have the best attack profile, but they're very versatile. But now basically Jorah here can make any unit a threat for the investment that you're getting. And the opponent here has to do something to deal with him. Now you could start trying to crown zap him off the board, but you're really banking on that D3 coming up as a 3. That's one of those reasons that the shift from 2 wounds to 3 wounds is so important, but also the shift in just baseline panic damage going from D3 plus 1 down to 3 means that's no longer a guaranteed thing. You only have a 33% chance here per crown zap here, assuming it goes through on a 5+, to actually just remove him. But again, you're talking 3 points. I mean, you're getting a mobile scout openings here for 3 points. I mean, it's a good value.
And that brings us finally to the neutral faction. And so we got Vargo Hoat here, the Crippler. And so he continues to keep vicious. He's got his weaken resolve. But now at 2 points, he's got sadistic mutilation, where after this unit completes a melee attack, you may spend 1 weaken token from the defender. If you do, destroy 1 infantry attachment in that unit. Oof. So you can start picking people out.
So Vargo here just got a couple buffs across the board. 1, he was originally 3 points. He was dropped down to 2, and then he gained the sadistic mutilation ability. Now, there's a bunch of reasons for these changes, but 1, 3-point attachments, when you start getting into that area, that is where you're really having to, they've got to be super, super strong, because you're starting to get into unit territory. And that time, it's almost always worth it just to get the extra bodies on the table than to really buff up a single unit to that capacity. So for that reason as well. So he got reduced down from 3 points to 2 for those reasons, but also because of Vicious. Vicious, because Panic in general got reduced in damage, its stock went a little bit further down versus Sundering, which that stock actually went a bit up because now puncturing through armor is, a big deal. So, that combination of abilities that he's giving, it basically got leveled out. But then also, as I said before, one of the things we also wanted to do was give some flavor passes to things. And so giving him this sadistic mutilation ability, spoilers for, a 20-year-old, series of books at this point. Everyone kind of knows that he's kind of responsible for, maiming one of the most popular characters in the entire franchise.
I don't think Mance Raider met him, though.
Yeah, Chase, you live in a great world over there. But so
wait, all right, fair enough. Jaime Lannister.
But so your 2 point investment here, he's giving you some really nice things to the unit, but he's also giving you a really scary thing to the enemy. But noting that this is a character as well. So you're getting 1 of this guy in your army. And at 2 points, it's a hefty investment and a limited investment of that. So, it needs to be something scary and special. And here we are.
All right. And then we've got the follower of the Red God, Jaqen H'ghar, at 4 points now instead of 5, with 2 choices now. So choosing a name has sort of been changed. And there's choosing a name and name given. So choosing a name, when Jaqen activates, he may replace his influence ability with the influence ability of any friendly or enemy NCU until the end of the round, or a name given influence. While influencing a friendly infantry unit, its melee attacks gain precision. So that's I like the kind of the dual options we're seeing here a lot.
Well, and to be honest, those are a little rare, but we've been showcasing a lot of them off because they're cool and they're new. So don't think that those are super, super common. We've just been showcasing proportionally a lot of those with the previews and what. So Jaqen here is another example of someone who got an entire rework, because the old effect was hitting a bunch of things that we really didn't like seeing. That's mainly, it was a lot of luck dependent dice rolls, and it was creating those situations where he's either going to be super, super effective or he's not really going to do that much. And those can be fun in the game, but we wanted to limit those because they can be kind of swingy to where someone's not going to have a good time. Either your opponent is it's going to be your dice are going to be on fire and it's just going to be really good for you, or he's going to do kind of nothing and you're going to be like, man, why did I spend the points for this guy?
I think it was at Nationals last year. Oh no, sorry, it was in the beginner tournament before Nationals last year, where I was just playing a fun rattle shirt list and I got him sniped on the first turn.
Well, I mean, that's what you get for playing free folk, Chase.
That's true. It was one of those things where I'm playing this list, you're playing that. I was like, what are the odds? And it was like, oh yeah, sadness.
But so here with Jaqen, we took him back to the drawing board here. And I super love his effect here, what he does. So first off, you can throw down infantry, you can get precision, which is nice to have. It gives you another kit to your toolbox of punching through things. But really, it's that choosing a name effect that, doubling down on influence effects. Now, of course, you can use this, you can build a list around this, because if you have a very powerful influence, like a Catelyn Stark, or, something to that capacity, you can now double down on that. So, I can foresee a lot of Stark lists that are running a bunch of House Umber with Catelyn and Jaqen as your NCUs. To double down on, I'm going to start, stacking, rolling highest value attack die on units. Or, you can bring him and just go, oh, cool. My opponent, is bringing a really cool influence effect here. So I'm just going to take that away from them as well. But then again, if your opponent doesn't have anything cool, and say you don't need to double down on your effect, you still have a generically useful effect here of giving a unit's melee attacks precision. There are obviously some combos that are better than others. I want to again stress out that doesn't stack a critical blow, so you just get that idea out of your head as we talked about earlier. But still, giving precision, a way to just bypass defense saves, that's kind of one of those generically useful utilities that you're going to give to a unit that doesn't require a lot of other combos to set up and just be effective.
And then we got Bloody Mummer Zorse Riders. And I love here what you've done with the Molly armament. So before, if you attacked enemy in the flank or rear, they became weakened. Now you give some choices. And before you also had disruption tactics, where if you attacked in the flank or rear, the enemy can't use or could not use orders or be the target of friendly tactics cards. You kind of pulled those into one ability, Molly armaments. And so before you roll an attack die, you get to select one. But if you're attacking the flank or rear, you get both of the following: +1 attack die and critical blow, or defender loses all abilities this turn. So this makes it a really versatile unit here, and it doesn't always have to just be going for the flank.
Right. So this is a unit that their abilities got shifted and moved around, but their overall role has remained the same. So they were a disruption unit before, and they're still a disruption unit now. We showed these guys off, by the way, because we were showing our boy Vargo there, and we showed the Bloody Mummer skirmishers before, so we just figured we'd complete the trifecta here of showing, him and the crew. But so like the Bloody Mummer Zorse Riders, this is an example of a unit that, while their abilities have changed and moved around, their role has still remained the same. And so, if you bought these guys, like I wanted a disruption cavalry unit, that's still what these guys are. And they still do it in largely the same way, but it's kind of just been streamlined to how they work. So now if they're motley armaments, because representing the diverse array of weapons that they have in the unit, you can either push them into full-blown attack, where they get the +1 attack die and critical blow, which is going to make them one of the scarier attack die profiles in the game at that point cost, because now you're throwing 8 dice for critical blow. That's pretty scary. Noting that they're on the cavalry as well, so they're hard hitting, they're fast, but they're also very kind of fragile because 5+, 7+. Or you're shutting off abilities. Now that one is because is used to the end of the turn. It is strictly offensive in nature. So these guys don't have a lot of defensive tech when it comes to themselves, but they're there for disrupting and shutting down the enemy. So with that effect, you're basically able to bypass a lot of your defensive things that could come into play. Like, for example, set defense, which would usually take away all your charge bonuses and things like that. These guys bypass that. So in addition to that, you have effects like, counter strike or agile, these things here. So funny enough, the Bloody Mummer Zorse Riders are really, really good at shutting down Bloody Mummer skirmishers. But hey, they got the Zorses. That's why that's why they make the big bucks. But then on top of that, you have elusive escape. So these guys can really employ those hit and run tactics and leave the enemy weakened, which that's a big deal for Vargo if you're running him as your commander. You definitely don't want to have weakened tokens on you when you're playing against that. But then again, that's another generically useful. These guys can rush in, hit an enemy where they don't have any defenses, and then they can get out of there and leave these guys weakened. So you're taking away their offensive potential and having synergies of other units as well.
So there's a lot here. What a cool thing to surprise us all with in this sort of holiday period. There's a lot for us to kind of sit and digest.
Well, so we figured it was the holiday break. A lot of people are off of work for the next couple of weeks and whatnot, and this would be a perfect time for people to be able to sit there and digest through the new game modes, the new rules, and just kind of see more of the bigger picture that's trickling in here, when we showcase more units and, more just overall the changes that are coming. And again, I want to say that we're still a ways away from it. We're talking Q2, so April at the earliest here that these will be dropping. So, I know people are getting excited, but that's why, we're trickling this out now and letting people just see some previews here, and we'll continue to do so leading up to that. And as previously mentioned, the Greyjoys are, they're coming out in Q1. And people have already seen, we've shown off the tactics cards, units, and some commanders here. You're seeing the changes that are going to be implemented across the other factions already incorporated into Greyjoys as their standard.
Well, I look forward to further exploring these things and seeing what else maybe is the visions in the flames to come. So thank you so much for making the time to come on here. I hope you have, from me, but also from everyone listening, from the whole community, thank you so much for all your work, and I hope you guys have a restful holiday.
Well, thanks, Chase. We appreciate that. And again, we just want to give another shout out to all of our player base and everything that plays the game, enjoys it, and everything. This that's the reason we do all this stuff. We want to make this the absolute best game and best hobby experience for all of our dedicated players out there. And that's why we're constantly looking at ways to improve the game and make this just the best experience, not just from a gameplay perspective, but from a hobby aspect. Because again, this is a lifestyle thing. It's not just you're getting together and you're playing games, but there's much more to it than that. You have communities that build up around this. You have friendships that build up around this. It's not so simple as just like, oh, we're just going to throw some miniature and slam some trays against each other.
That's so true. But it's been really reassuring seeing where you're taking the game. And I know we're hyped. So if you're listening, guys, let us know in the comments below what you're most excited for, what you think of the changes. And in the meantime, we hope you get your miniatures on the table.